everyone, and welcome. Today, I am talking to Jenny Trevino Blanket, who is the voice behind the website growhotpeppers.com. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today is growing hot peppers. Welcome, Jenny.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So let's get started with you just giving us a little bit of background on yourself. Like, when did you start gardening and where do you live? What zone? And why hot peppers? Why not broccoli or something?
Well, as you said, I am Jenny at Grow Hot Peppers, and I am currently in zone 9. I can't remember if it's A or B, but I do know it's 9. Um, I grow peppers in the Central Valley of California. I started gardening probably 12, 13 years ago, something definitely over 10. And I started because my partner actually her family is from Merida, Yucatan, where habaneros are huge over there. And so I wanted to bring them something special and be able to gift them lots of tasty habaneros. And so I started attempting to grow habaneros and I had nothing but problems. It took a while before I could get any plants to grow. Um, and so I started focusing on that just because I had so much trouble growing peppers. And I had never grown up with spicy peppers whatsoever, but I ended up getting pretty addicted to them after I got my plants to grow finally. And I just kept going from there because there's endless varieties of peppers. And even though I started growing on peppers and specifically in containers, because I never had any kind of land to plant in. Um, Last year, I started also expanding into other foods that I grow indoors as well, like sprouts and microgreens. And that's been a lot of fun. And it's just easier, I've noticed for me, and I think for other people who have smaller spaces to be able to grow in containers or in systems like that. So, but that's kind of the origin of how the peppers got started.
I love the fact that you're growing hot peppers indoors because I'm in Illinois and our pepper season, well, first of all, we can't really get peppers in the ground before May. And
Mhm.
then if we're lucky, we're gonna have them until around our first frost date, which is October 15th. If we're not lucky, we're gonna get a random freeze in sometime in September, and that's it. It just takes one freeze, and it doesn't matter if it's 90 degrees tomorrow, your peppers are gone. So I'm really excited about learning more about growing them indoors.
Yeah, it really helps to grow them indoors because, as you mentioned, it's really hard to get peppers in the ground, and it's got such a long growing season that the timing is everything. And so, when you start them indoors, you can just end up with these awesome, healthy plants and put them outside after the last thread of frost has passed, and then you can have a really nice start to your season and not have to worry about all the winter weather and such. But generally, peppers are going to be, you can start them indoors from seed and they'll generally be indoors with you for about 8 to 12 weeks. So it's a pretty interesting time commitment, but it's a lot of fun.
So do you put them in containers and then move them outside in the containers? And then like at the end, when it starts to get cold, you'd bring them back inside and they keep growing?
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. So I start with little containers and then just keep them going indoors. And a lot of times I have red solo cups as my pots inside the house. They work awesome. And then when they are ready to go outdoors, then I just transfer them to another container. That's just my preference. So usually like a 5 gallon bucket works awesome. So I get them at the hardware store or I'll use like Earthbox Originals. It's really good for people with small spaces because you can actually fit about 6 small size pepper plants in there.
In an earth box, you can fit
Oh
6?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So what about a 5-gallon bucket? Is that 1 or 3 or
Well, generally you want to put one pepper plant per container. So in a 5 gallon bucket, you would put one plant. And the benefit over something like an earth box is it's just going to be able to grow larger and and really spread out, and you ultimately might get more chilies in that way. But I've had success with both the 5-gallon bucket and the earth box.
Okay. And you're going to show us in a little bit exactly how to start the pepper seeds, which I think is super exciting. And the one of the things I know you're going to show is the seeds you're actually going to be planting are Carolina Reaper. And I don't know who's listening and knows what a Carolina Reaper is, but I learned when my daughter was at the end of her pregnancy and I went to Texas so that I could be there when the baby was born. And she was very overdue. And she and her husband were like looking for everything, like how to induce labor naturally. And he saw something about eating hot peppers. And so he went to the store and he brought home some Carolina Reapers. And my daughter, I don't remember if it was my daughter or me, who Googled it to see how many Scoville units there were in a
Oh,
Carolina Reaper.
yeah, it's definitely one of the hottest. Super tasty, but it takes practice. And when I eat reapers, I start from the little tail end and just kind of work my way up. I definitely don't eat the whole pot at one time. I don't have the stomach for it, but some people do.
Yeah, so how do you eat a pepper like that? Because I know, like, habaneros are delicious. I wish they weren't so hot because the flavor is really good. So how like, I wouldn't even my daughter and I both just looked at it and was like, "No way, we are not even going to try that." And he's like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna try it." And then I thought that it was gonna put my daughter into labor because she was laughing so hard. Like, he was literally on the floor of the kitchen, like, moaning and, like,
Oh no.
it was hilarious because he just popped it in his mouth.
Oh my gosh, that's brave.
So how exactly does one experience something that's, like, in the 6-digit Scoville range?
Yeah, I would definitely start small. And by that, I mean, I would cut off a little piece of the pepper. Try not to get any of the seeds or veins in that because that's where a lot of the capsaicin is concentrated. So I would just cut off a little piece and then you can try it raw. And I always like to just to get a sense of the flavor. But a lot of times people eat little pieces of peppers in soups or stews. It's a really nice way to flavor it, but not make it so nuclear when you're trying to eat it. Otherwise, good ways to eat them are to dehydrate the pepper if the person has the equipment to do so, and make like a really tasty salt or seasoning. That's another common way I use it. And pickling is another good way so that you don't have to eat, excuse me, you don't have to eat the whole pepper at once. But generally, my favorite way is in a soup or a stew. It's pretty delicious.
Okay, so you could slice them and pickle them just like you would jalapenos or serranos.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Do
Very
you
tasty.
have any tips for people who are new to growing peppers? Like, any common mistakes that you see people make?
Yeah, I do. Actually, getting the timing right for planting is really key. So I always recommend knowing your last date of frost, and that's generally found in like the old farmer's almanac. And then count back at least 3 months to get a sense of when you should be planting. So timing is really key. Having a good seed source is also really key too. I get asked a lot whether you should go harvest seeds from the grocery store. You can do that, but I would recommend against it just because those peppers tend to be hybrids and it's really hard to get a good plant from it. And if you do, they're not going to necessarily be like the pepper that you bought at the store. I would also say planting too deep is a problem. I would never go beyond about a quarter of an inch. If you plant too deep, it's really hard for them to germinate that way. And also letting your growing media get too wet or too dry because again the seed needs time to germinate, the proper atmosphere to germinate. But probably the biggest advice I would have is to make sure you get something like a plant heat mat because peppers are very tropical plants that need that humid environment to grow. And so a lot of times I'll get people saying, they've done all of the things I mentioned, but they can't get their pepper seeds to germinate. And it's usually because it's just not hot enough. Anywhere from 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit is pretty ideal for a pepper. And that's really going to make all the difference. And a lot of times people will email me and say, that's how I finally got them to sprout. And yeah, it's absolutely necessary for pepper seeds.
That's a really good point. I know I have the heat mats and I love them because we are starting in our basement and
Mhm.
it's like 60 degrees down there, which is pretty chilly.
Yeah,
And it would take like 2 weeks for seeds to germinate, and sometimes they wouldn't. And so getting that seed mat just made such a difference. They germinate now in about 3 or 4 days, most seeds do.
yeah, yeah.
So, and that's good to know, and that's a really good point because I was, talking to somebody else recently who was growing microgreens and said that she started a tray on a seed mat and a tray not on a mat, and that she didn't see any difference in the germination time. But those are not warm weather plants like
Mhm.
peppers. So that's because I was really confused by that. I'm like, whoa, well, it makes a huge difference for me.
Right, right.
Um, and most of what I'm starting ahead of time, like I usually direct seed lettuce and stuff right in my garden. Most
Mhm.
of what I'm starting ahead of time in my basement are the more warm weather things like
Right.
peppers and tomatoes.
Yeah, I was gonna say it actually makes a huge difference too with tomatoes and eggplants and things like that.
Mhm.
So it's a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, it was a game changer for me. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for chatting about this.
Mhm.
And now we're gonna cut away to you showing us how to plant pepper seeds.
Okay.
Before we start this demonstration, I just want to mention there's a lot of ways to start pepper seeds indoors, but this process I'm going to show you is what consistently works for me. And by the way, these steps also work for other warm weather crops like eggplant and tomatoes. I also wanted to mention that I know this is a lot of information, so I've made it available in a downloadable sheet so you can reference it when you're ready. So the first thing when starting pepper seeds is you want to get the timing just right. Peppers have a long growing season. They don't do well in the cold weather and they will not survive frost. So the way that you determine the ideal planting time is to know your last expected date of frost. You can get this from the Old Farmer's Almanac. From there, once you have that date, you want to count back at least 3 months to get your planting date. So here are the supplies you're going to need. You'll need your pepper seeds of choice. You will need a planting tray. The tray will hold water and it will also hold all of the containers that you plan to have or how many plants you plan to have. So if I'm only planting one just like this is an old microwave tray. That is my planting tray. So then you are going to need a container to actually hold your seeds and your growing media. So this is a peat pot, which in itself is its own little container, but you can use any kind of container that will hold your seeds and your growing media. And if you are growing a lot at a time and you don't have seed pots on hand, you can always use an empty egg carton just like this. This works pretty well. So besides that, you are also going to need a cover, and let me just grab it here. If you buy a seed starting kit, a lot of times those kits come with a cover just like this. And this cover is plastic that goes right over the top, and it also has these vents inside so that you can allow for airflow. If you do not have a lid of some sort, you can make one out of plastic cling wrap. You would just simply, for example, stretch it across the top of the tray, and then you would just poke some holes right in the top to allow for airflow. So besides that, when you're getting started, you're going to want a spray bottle with water, and make sure you have some plant labels. You are also going to need what I consider to be the most important, and that is a plant heat mat. And let me just get it in frame here. So this is what your plant heat mat looks like. It is a waterproof item that goes right underneath your planting tray, and you plug it into an outlet and it provides warmth from underneath your tray. Pepper seeds in particular really do need that warm tropical environment in order to germinate. It's very difficult to get them to germinate otherwise, so I highly recommend that. And the last thing that you're going to need is a grow light. Some common types of plant grow lights include a fluorescent and LED. And lastly, for extra credit, chamomile tea, and I'll explain why in just a second. So once you have your seeds, the one thing you're going to want to do is just inspect your seeds. So a seed packet like this typically comes with 10 to 15 seeds. What you're looking for when you look at seeds is you just want to make sure that you select the best specimens. These are the ones that I've selected to plant today. And if I had seen any that were discolored or maybe shriveled or just smaller than the rest of the bunch, I would not plant them, but these all look pretty good. The next thing you're going to want to do is get your chamomile tea. Now, what you're going to do is just brew up a batch of tea as you would, and once that is done, you'll use the same tea bag to make another batch, and then you will have your weak tea solution. And the reason why you want to do this is because it does two things. First, it actually helps soften the seed shell, and it also helps kill any existing bacteria. So when you make your tea solution, you would simply pour it in a cup like this, dump all of your seeds inside, and let them soak. And I would let them soak anywhere from 48 to 72 hours to give it plenty of time to soak. And what will happen in that time is the seeds will generally all sink towards the bottom. If you see any that are kind of floating towards the top, I wouldn't plant those because they may not germinate as well. So once you have your prepared seeds, you are going to take your growing media. And if this was a container that I was putting seed starting mix in, I would go about 3/4 of the way to the top. And oh, I should mention that this is going to be pre-moistened. So I've already pre-moistened this peat pot, but you would pre-moisten your seed starting mix before you put them in the pots. And when I say pre-moistened, I don't mean soppy, drippy wet. It should be able to be light and fluffy, but you should feel the moisture in it. You just don't want it soggy. So once you have your container prepared, you're going to just take something, just make a little indentation right in the center here, just like that. And I wouldn't go too far deep, usually maybe 1/4 of an inch for reference. And then what you want to do is you just want to drop those seeds right in the center, just like that. And then just lightly cover it up, just like that. And pepper seeds, do not plant them too deep. You wouldn't plant them, further down, like somewhere around here at the most, because they do need a shallow planting. And once you're done with that, you're just going to take your spray bottle and just kind of spritz the top a little bit. And important as well, make sure you add your label because it is easy to forget. And generally you want to have the name of the variety that you're growing and also the planting date. Whoops, I forgot to mention that on here or write that on there. But you want to add your label. And then you put this back in the tray. And this is what it's going to look like when you have this set up. So let me get that out of the way there. So what you'll do is you will get your heat mat and plug it in. You put your plant tray on top with your container, and then you will grab the lid, whatever you're using, and just put it right over the top. This is a new heat mat and it's wanting to roll on me, but normally they just lay flat. So you'll put the lid right over the top. And let me grab the lid for a second. I want to point something out. So with this lid, if you're using something from a kit, I just want to point out that they have vents on the top and they also have some on the side. So what I would do to start is I would just kind of slide that about halfway open. And what this is going to do is allow for good airflow, because if you have it completely closed, it has the potential to get way too humid and potentially develop diseases. So I usually slide it halfway and on the sides, and then as you continue on, just pay attention to your lid. So if it becomes sopping wet, and what I mean by that is if you lift the lid and it's just dripping water all over the place, it's probably not open enough. So I would just slide it open a little more. You'll just have to kind of play around with it and experiment with it. But the idea is that you just don't want it to be sopping wet inside. A little moisture is okay, and you will get, it's creating a mini hothouse environment. So that is normal for some moisture, but you just don't want too much. So you will have to experiment with that, or potentially poke some more holes in the plastic wrap if that is what you're using. And from there, one thing I also want to point out too is once you have officially planted your seeds, I would encourage you to kind of look at the top of the media to see the color and get a sense of the weight. And the reason why is that will help with watering, because when you have a fully watered container, you want to get a sense of what it feels like watered, especially if you're just starting out. Watering is very tricky. Too much water, and that can lead to disease in your plant. And not enough water will not encourage germination, and the plant just will not grow as well. So it is tricky, but once you get your flow, you will be able to tell when your plant needs water. And speaking of water, something that you want to do is use something like distilled water, or you might want to use rainwater if you have it. The problem with tap water is it tends to contain chlorine and other ingredients that do not encourage good growth. If all you have is tap water, that's okay. What I do in that situation is I just fill a container and then I just let this sit out for 24 hours, and that really helps a lot. So when you are ready to water your plant, usually you can tell, again, the weight will be lighter and the color of your growing media tends to be lighter. What you can do is take some water and do what is known as the bottom watering method. And I'm not actually going to pour water in here because it's already been watered. But what you would do is just pour in your water, and I usually let it sit about halfway up. When you water from the bottom, it actually really encourages good root growth in your plants. And it also, again, discourages disease. And you'll notice I keep mentioning that because it can definitely, you can have a beautiful plant, and if you lose it to something like damping off, that it's so depressing when that happens. And it's happened to me way more than once. So that's why I am cautioning you against it. So once you water, I forgot to mention, when you water, you might want to add some more of that weak chamomile tea solution to what you put in your tray. And I do that again to help prevent mold and disease. And I'll usually do that until I have a small plant with at least 2 sets of true leaves. That has really helped. So once you've watered, and again, you want to go a quarter to halfway up the sides, set your timer for about 15 minutes. And when you come back, you'll see if the top is darker. You're waiting for the moisture to reach the surface of your growing media. So 15 minutes can usually work for a container of this size, but sometimes it'll take a lot longer. And it just really depends on your container size and your growing media. So that may be a lot less time, it may be a lot more time, but you again kind of use that weight test to help you, and also look for the water to appear on the top, and that will also help you with that. So when you water your plant, the next thing you're going to want to do is dump out the water. I will caution you against this. Definitely never leave a properly watered container just sitting in water, because that encourages disease, and it's a good way to lose your plants. So every single day after you've done that, you want to check for germination. I don't have any plants right now that have sprouted, but if I did, it would look something like this. It would have like a green little upside down U shape. It's pretty cool. So you want to check daily. And I will mention that that is one of the most common questions I get is, how long does it take pepper seeds to germinate? I wish I could give you a definite time frame, but so much of it depends on the variety of pepper you're growing. And it also depends on your growing environment temperature. So It can be anywhere from a couple of days or even a few weeks or more. And if you want a very, very general estimate, sweet peppers generally take about 5 days. Hot peppers can take a couple of weeks to even 100 days, but you'll just have to kind of see what happens. So after germination, this is key. Whoops, don't drop your plant after germination. But after germination, what you want to do is you want to remove the tray off of the heat mat. So if this was the heat mat, now's the time to take it off the heat mat. Also, make sure to remove your lid, whether that be the plastic wrap or that lid that I was showing you before. Those two things will help you continue to grow strong seedlings. If you do not do this, you might experience weak and leggy seedlings that will topple over. And when I say leggy, that means thin, weak, very easily to fall over. So once you have taken your seeds off of your seedlings off of the heat and out from under the lid, the next thing you want to do is position them under your grow light. Now, you can use, as I mentioned, a fluorescent or LED grow light. And if this was the grow light, for example, you definitely don't want it to be for fluorescent. Anywhere from 6 inches away is usually a measurement that I use for pepper seedlings. But I will say this, with lights, LED lights in particular, that distance may be greater. So I would, if you're using LED, I would definitely check the manufacturer's instructions and see what they recommend, because 6 inches may be too close. And the reason for positioning that light only 6 inches away is because you want to grow strong and stocky seedlings. You don't want your plant reaching too far for the light, because again, they're going to get that thin stem, and that's not what we want. We want strong, stocky, and thick plants. So as far as grow lights go, anywhere from a good schedule that I use for my pepper seedlings is 16 hours on and 8 hours off a day. That tends to work really well. Now, at this point, you'll have started your pepper seedlings, but given they'll be indoors with you approximately 8 to 12 weeks, they'll need some ongoing care besides the water and light that you're giving them. So during this time, they'll need to be fertilized, moved to a larger container, which is also known as potting up, and hardened off before they go outside. On your reference sheet, you'll find more information about all of these things. So I hope this has been really helpful to you and that it helps you grow lots of plants this season.